With the help of Hashem, we are learning Sukah Daf Mem Zayin Chevra. We are already entering into the last 10 dafim of Masechta Sukah, and the entire daf today is going to be about Shmini Atzeres. So first of all, we're learning the Sugya. We are discussing the question whether we make a bracha of Leishev Basukah while sitting in the Sukkah on the 8th day in Chutz La'aretz. We're going to also be discussing whether we make a Shakianu on Shmini Atzeres, and this is independent of Eretz Yisrael or Chutz La'aretz. Do you make a Shakianu? Do you not make a Shakianu? And as we will see, this will be subject to a big machloikas. In other words, those who opine that a Shakianu is recited for the Yom Tov of Shmini Atzeres, they hold Shmini Atzeres regel b'fnei atzmayu. And there's a paradox here, because it's called the 8th. The 8th means it's not the first. But on the other hand, as we will see that for various halachas, ultimately at the end of the daf, we're going to learn again about this mnemonic of Pizar Kishav. For those 6 items, all incorporated in this mnemonic, we have something unique that separates Shmini Atzeres from the other Yomim Tovim, which will justify why we should make a Shehechiyanu. Now we're going to learn other dinim regarding Lina, for example. Lina means that when a person comes to Yerushalayim for Yom Tov, truth be told, also when a person comes to Yerushalayim, to the Beis HaMikdash, to bring a carbon, a person should tarry overnight. Not do what you need to do and right away run back. Question will be whether Lina is needed for Shmini Atzeres. Now obviously if a person brings a carbon on Shmini Atzeres itself, every time a person brought a carbon, they should overnight in Yerushalayim. They should tarry in Yerushalayim to express that they're not rushing. I fulfilled my obligation and I'm running away. I'm running back home. But there's a possibility, and on Shmini Atzeres you have to have simcha. Part of simcha is eating carbon shlamim. Say that you can bring a shlamim on the 7th day. Shlamim could be eaten for 2 days, which means you will have the meat of the shlamim on the 8th day, but you didn't bring it on the 8th day. Nevertheless, we will learn those who opine that the Shmini Atzeres Yom Tov itself brings upon that obligation of tarrying overnight. So you cannot leave Motzoi Yom Tov. We're speaking about an Eretz Yisrael. The 8th day is the final day, but you have to wait until the following morning. We're going to go a little bit about Bikurim. We're going to learn Shitas Rabbi Yehuda, as well as Shitas Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, that we do the waving ceremony for the Bikurim. But basically, we will all be learning about Shmini Atzeres. And without any further ado, Chevra, let us start. We left off 3 lines on the top of the Amid. Right, Omar Rav Yosef, again coming back to the question of whether we make a bracha in the Sukah on Shmini Atzeres or not. But it's important to recap, because really what we are in middle of is the first version of the Machloikis, and that began on Daf Mem Vav Amud Beis. So Rav Yehuda, the son of Rav Shmuel Bar Shilas, says in the name of Rav that Shmini is treated like maybe it's the 7th, which means that you gotta sit in the Sukkah. And it's considered bona fide 8th day regarding the bracha. And Rabbi Yochanan says that Shmini Atzeres is considered the 8th day, both for the Yom Tov, for the mitzvah of the Sukkah, and for the bracha. And as the Gemara just ended up explaining, that everyone agrees, according to the first version, both that which was said in the name of Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, that you have to sit in the Sukkah on the 8th day, because in Chutz La'aretz, maybe it's the 7th day. The Machlekes is only, it's even Rabbi Yochanan is Moida, that you sit. The Machlekes is whether you make a bracha or not. That was all the top of the Amid, that the first version, which was Rav Yehuda, Bereid Rav Shmuel Bar Shilas, in the name of Rav, will hold that since you're obligated to sit in the Sukkah, Shmini Atzeres, you also have to make the bracha of Leishev Basukah. And Rabbi Yochanan opines, yes, you have to sit in the Sukkah, but how can you make a bracha, Leishev Basukah? And as Rashi pointed out, when it comes to davening, when it comes to Kiddush, when it comes to Birchas HaMazon, the words that you are using to describe the 8th day is not Chag HaSukkah Hazeh. You're calling it, the Girs of Rashi was Shmini Chag Atzeres Hazeh. We pointed out that our nusach is Shmini Atzeres HaChag Hazeh. In other words, since by all of the other brachas, we're not calling it the holiday of Sukkah. So in order to be consistent, how can you make the bracha leishev basukah? If it's not Chag HaSukkah in Kiddush, then you can't make the bracha leishev basukah. But sitting in the sukkah, you have to. This is so far where we're at. I do want to point out that there was a big discussion amongst the Rishonim that we do find in other areas that we have this type of contradiction in brachas. Just for example, benching the Omer. Right? We in Chutz La'aretz, we have 2 days Pesach. So we're going to daven the davening of Yom Tov. We're going to say Hallel, which means it's the first day Pesach, because biblically there's only 1 day of Yom Tov in the beginning of Pesach. And yet we make the bracha of a counting of the Omer. Counting of the Omer is connected dafke to the 16th day. In other words, there are times that we can make 2 brachas that really indicate that for this bracha we consider it 1 day, for the other bracha it's considered another day, but we don't make it together. That's the Nakuda, amongst many other approaches. Here, a Yid is sitting in the Sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, and they're going to make Kiddush. And don't forget that if we were to make a leishev basukah, we're going to make it also part of Kiddush at the end of Kiddush. So if you're calling in Kiddush the Yom Tov, not Chag HaSukkah, but Shmini Atzeres HaChag Hazeh, Rabbi Yochanan says that in the same Kiddush, means at the same time, you can go ahead and make a bracha leishev basukah, but you have to sit in the sukkah. That's where we're up to. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yosef, that you should know, Nekoit de Rabbi Yochanan biyadcha, that we should grab onto the shita of Rabbi Yochanan, that we do not make the bracha leishev basukah on Shmini Atzeres, even though, again, according to this version, L'kula Alma, you have to sit in the sukkah. Because the Rafuna Bar Bizna and V'chol Gedei Lahador Iklou B'Sukkah Bashmini. They sat in the sukkah on the 8th day. 8th day meaning in Chutz La'aretz, the 8th day in Bavel, which is considered halachically Safek Shvi'i, whether this is during the time of the Safek, which it was. Later it's Minig Aviseinu B'Yodenu, but it's called a day that began as a Safek Shvi, and Mesav Havu Yasvi, that were careful only to eat, to dwell on the Sukkah, but Baruchai Loi Barichi, but Abracha Leishev HaSukkah, they did not make. Again, a raya that everyone accepted the shita of Rabbi Yochanan counters the Gemara. That's not a proof. Dilma, maybe if you were to have to make a bracha of Leishev HaSukkah every day, maybe they would have sided with that which was said in the name of Rav. Maybe the reason why they did not make a bracha is, as we learned above, there are those who hold that you only make a bracha once for the whole sukkahs. Because since you're chayv to dwell day and night, there's no hefsek. It's like kiyoy ma'aricha, in which you make a bracha early on for the whole day, for the whole sukkahs. So there's no raya from them. Counters the Gemara, yes, there is a raya. Because Gemiri, we know that story that we were mentioning was a story where tragic story that they may afar asu. They came from the meadow. Tosfos points out that we know that these chachamim did not dwell in the sukkah for the whole 7 days. That was because of religious persecution. So they went to a place where al pidin you're not chayiv anyways, is when you're traveling, when you're out there in the meadow. Tosfos says why they could have, the hut that different shepherds built in these meadows suffice for a sukkah. They went to a location where such a hut was not found. In other words, they put themselves in a place where halachically there's an exemption because there was a sakana by religious persecution that Yidden cannot keep sukkahs. We know that's what happened. They returned on the 8th day, which means this was the first time that they had the ability to sit in the sukkah. If they would have held that you make a bracha on Shmini Atzeres, when do you say that one bracha suffices for the whole Yom Tov? When you make it once. They never made it yet. And still they didn't make it. So again, this is just a proof that all of those Ameiraim, all of the Chachamim, sided with the Shita of Rabbi Yochanan that a bracha is not made, even though you're obligated to sit in the Sukkah. Atkan, the first version of the Machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda, Bereder Rab Shmuel Bar Shilas, in the name of Rav, and Rabbi Yochanan. Ikeda Amri, another version of their Machlokes, that Beruchi Kol Yamalei Pligi Dolei Mevarchina. Fakert, everyone agrees that a bracha is not made. Even Rabbi Yehuda holds a bracha is not made. What is the machlokes? Whether you should sit. According to the version, which is Rabbi Yehuda, in the name of Rav, that holds it's considered like the seventh, it's like Shiva, L'Sukah. What he meant to say is, Meisav Yasvinon. He meant to say is, at least you sit. Ulamanda Amar, which is Rabbi Yechanan, quoting his words, Shmini Lozeh Lozeh, what he meant, according to this latter version, is, not only do you not make a bracha, you don't even sit. Now that will be a question. Why would Rabbi Yechanan hold that you do not sit? And there are many approaches given to it. B'chlal, we mentioned that whenever you're machmir, there's many times a downside. And there is a downside here. In other words, by saying that since we have a suffix when the first day of the month is, which they had a doubt, so we're going to say it's a suffix when the 15th day is. So we don't know when the 7th day is. Maybe the 8th day is the 7th day. By saying, you know what? Keep Yom Tov, but sit in the Sukkah. The moment people will see you sitting in the Sukkah, this is the way we understand Rabbi Yechanan. Let's not forget, my friends, that unlike Pesach, that biblically Yom Tov is in the beginning, and Yom Tov, Shvi'ah Shal Pesach is a Yom Tov, the Yom Tov of Sukkot, not Shmini Atzeres, the Yom Tov of Sukkot, the 7 days of Sukkot, Minat Torah, has 1 day Yom Tov in the beginning, and all of the following 6 days is Chol HaMoed. All of the 6 days. People know that. So maybe if someone will observe you sitting in a Sukkah, they're going to say, you're sitting in a Sukkah? It's Chol HaMoed. And they're not going to keep Yom Tov properly. They're going to take light the other suffix that attack might be the 8th day. That's why Rabbi Yechanan, according to this version, holds that in our case, sit Chutz La'aretz, they would keep 2 days Yom Tov in the beginning, but the last day, in other words, Shmini Atzeres, they would not even sit in the Sukkah. Meisav Nami Lo Yasvinon. And on that, Amar Rabbi Yosef, this the second version, the Koyte Rabbi Yechanan Biyotcha. That what? You don't even sit in the Sukkah. And what was his raya? Because the Mordechay, the Shmaitza Mani, who brought to us the first opinion? I mean, it said in the name of Rav. But who do we have? Who was the Amoyre that said it in the name of Rav? Rav Yehuda, Bereid Rav Shmuel, Bar Shilas. According to the latter version, that was Rav that says that you dwell in a Sukkah. You know what? Rav Yehuda, Bereid Rav Shmuel himself, on the 8th day, which is considered suffix Shvi, Lebar Misukah Yosef, he himself did not follow what he said in the name of Rav. He sat outside the Sukkah, according to our version, like Rabbi Yechanan. And that's a very important kalal. Now what does that mean? It means either he found out later that Rav retracted, or it means that he never said it in the name of Rav, or it means that he wasn't certain whether this was what Rav said. If not, he would have done it. So if the one that brought to us this more chamor, let's call this a more chamor opinion, himself did not fulfill it, then we're going to paskin with the other, which is with Rabbi Yechanan. However, now what do we do? And we mentioned, it was 2 days ago, the klal we have a halachic Rabbi Yechanan, and now we don't know what Rabbi Yechanan said. There's a machlokes what he said. So the Gemara says, V'hilchasen, this indeed is what we paskin. Is Meisav Yasvinon, that on Shmini Atzeres, B'chutz La'aretz, we call it Shmini Atzeres, the Nusach in the Kiddush, in the davening, in the benching, changes to Shmini Atzeres, not the Chag HaSukkos. There is no mitzvah to sit in the Sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, but we sit, because suffix Shvi, because Chutz La'aretz, it might be the 7th, but Baruch Alay Mevarchinon, not to make a inherent stira at the same time. Mamish, the way we do it. We sit in the Sukkah, on Shmini Atzeres, but we don't make the bracha, Leishev Basukah. Okay, that concludes the question of brachos, and now we're going to go on to the second, final topic of today. The big topic is regarding the bracha of Shakianu. Amar Rebbe Yochanan, another din, a din that we paskin like, that oimrim zman b'shmini shel chag. That on Shmini Atzeres, we're not focusing Eretz Yisrael or Chutz La'aretz, all the same. On the 8th day, even though it's called the 8th, it's the 8th. That means it's not the first. It's not the beginning of a seasonal Yom Tov, which would justify a Shakianu. Yet, yes, you make a Shakianu. And to appreciate the contrast, on the last day of Pesach, Even though Shvi'i Shel Pesach is holier than the day prior to it, than the day that precedes it, because prior to Shvi'i is Chol HaMoed. Doesn't matter, it's the 7th, it's not the beginning. Shakianu is made on the arrival of something new, it's not called new. Okay, V'amar Rab Levi Bar Chama, V'itema Rab Chama Bar Chanina. I will prove that Rabbi Yechanan is right. Again, even though the name that God gives it is Shmini Atzeres, yet you make a Shakianu. Why? Because there are certain novelties in Shmini Atzeres. It's chaluk, it's separated, it's different, it's not a continuum. How is it? Where is it chaluk? Begimel Devarim. What are the three things? It's amazing that all three is in negatives. Besukah. In other words, the obligation to sit in the sukkah is only for 7 days, not on the 8th day. So you don't sit in the sukkah. Forget about the sugi above. Above we were learning that in Chutz La'aretz, because of the Safek Shvi'i, you sit in the sukkah. But when you know it's Shmini, you don't sit in the sukkah. Number 2, lulav. Again, it's what you don't do. You don't take the lulav on Shmini Atzeres. There's no mitzvah. And number 3, the halacha l'Moshe Sinai, or according to those who hold that it's takamerumas in the Torah, that there was something unique that was offered on the Mizbeach only during the Karban Tamid, only during the 7 days of Sukkot, which is Nisach Hamayim, together with the Tamid, together with the wine, was not poured with the wine on Shmini Atzeres. So it's not that there was something new as to do, there's no positive novelty, but by the fact that it's different, it's chaluk, because those 3 mitzvahs are not done, it's different enough for us to consider it a new holiday, it's novelty, you make the blessing of Shakianu. Now, the Gemara says, even though one of these 3 is not according to all, the Tanach Rabbi Yehuda that holds that Belug Hayem Nasech Kol Shmoina, let's quickly review what's the din. There's 2 arguments regarding Nisuch Hamayim. The Tanakama holds that the amount of water that is poured together with the morning Tamid during the 7 days of Sukkot is 3 loig. Rabbi Yehuda holds only 1 loig. Argument number 2, the Tanakama holds that Nisuch Hamayim is only done on the 7 days of Sukkot. The Tanach Rabbi Yehuda holds it's done all of the 8 days. So we said that Shmini Atzeres is new because it's chaluk begimel devarim, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, that it's not chaluk with 3 because Nisuch Hamayim is done on Shmini Atzeres, but it's enough that it is chaluk bebeis devarim. The fact that it's separated from the 7, it's different from the 7, that there is no obligation to sit in the sukkah, there's no obligation to take the lulav, that justifies making a Shakianu as we make it in the entry of Shmini Atzeres. Again, when is it done? Women do it when they light the candles. Men do it when they make Kiddush. If that's the logic, why can't I argue? It's also separated. Let's view it as a new Yom Tiv. How is it separated? It's separated that there is no obligation to eat the matzah. The master taught us only Laila Rishon Chayva, only the first night of Pesach, which is the night of the Seder, are we obligated to eat matzah. Bikan ve'elach, from then on, there is no obligation. That's a newness. Whoa, this newness doesn't begin with shiur shel Pesach. This newness begins with the 2nd day Pesach. 2nd day Pesach is Chol HaMoed in Eretz Yisrael. It doesn't make sense that you go from Yom Tiv into Chol HaMoed. Chol HaMoed has less holiness than the day prior than Yom Tiv. You're not going to make a Shakianu for Chol HaMoed. But Shvi'i Shel Pesach is a Yom Tiv again. So this concept of, now there isn't a obligation to eat the matzah, and the Shakianu that it can bring with it should come about on Shvi'i Shel Pesach. First taste, that's the kasha, says the Gemara, it's not correct. Number 1, let's go back. Even on the first day of Pesach, you're not obligated to eat matzah in the morning. You know, it wasn't that there is a day, there's an obligation on one day, that obligation goes away on another day. So it's chaluk. No, it's more than that. Hachiyashta, over here, melayla chaluk, miyoyim elo chaluk. No, it's Shvi'i Shel Pesach. You don't have to eat matzah, so it's separated from what? It's only separated from the first night. It's not even separated from the first day, time of the first day. But over here, by Shmini Atzeres, when we're saying that you're not obligated to sit in the sukkah, you're not obligated to take the lulav, that separates it from the daytime of the day and of the night. That's answer number one. Answer number two, Ravina Amar, even though we explained the Havamina, but at the end of the day, the obligation of matzah is only on the first night, and from the second day on, there isn't an obligation. Which means Shvi Shal Pesach is not separated from the day preceding it. I get it that on Chol HaMoed there's lesser holiness, so you can't make the Shakianu on Chol HaMoed. But still, you can't compare one with the other. Zeh, Shmini Atzeres is Cholok Mishalafonov. These halachas of no sukkah, no lulav, the day prior there was, and today there is not. But v'zeh, this concept of you not having to eat matzah doesn't separate Shviur Shal Pesach from the day prior to it. Only separates it from Mishalifnei Fanov. Lifnei Fanov doesn't mean 2 days back. It means from many days behind. Not the day that immediately precedes it. It's not enough for you to make a Shakianu. And we're going to go with Rav Papa Amar, that Hachi over here, right? No, he's telling you even more. It's not only because it's lacking 2 or 3 mitzvahs. It's more than that. That's all in the negative. Now we're going to learn about something that's in the positive. That over here, on the 8th day, the Torah writes that you bring a par. And we're going to read Rashi in a moment. And on Sukah, the Torah speaks about bringing parim. Now, what does that mean? So let's read inside Rashi. It's the middle of the Amit. Here by Shmini Atzeres, par, and over there parim, kol yemei hachag. During the 7 days of Sukkot, kerevim, parim, harbe. We brought many bull offerings. We also brought rams, and we also brought sheep, and we'll see about that in a moment. But let's first begin, the 70 bulls, keneged the 70 nations of the world that we are praying for. And the 70 were divided, that on the first day we brought 13, on the second day we brought 12, and that went down, that on the 7th day we brought 7. And if you cheshbon together, 13, 12, 11, 10, etc., you'll come to the number 70. So, kol yimei ha'kerevim parim harbe, u'mismatim v'holchim echad liyoim ad yoim hashvi, shekerevim parim shiva. In other words, there is a pattern of the system of bringing the bulls. It decreased 1 per day. If Shmini Atzeres would have been considered a continuum from the 7 days prior, it is called the 8th. But if it would be a bona fide continuation, then what would be the right number of bulls to follow the pattern? 6 bulls. But by the fact that on Shmini Atzeres you bring only 1 bull, par echad levadoi, nimtza she'einoi miseder shar hayamim. So that mamish separates it, not by omission, but by the fact that a bull is brought. It's also a bull and not 6, but it's about something that you do that shows that we're not following a pattern. We're beginning a new pattern. Let's go inside the Gemara. Rav Nachman by Yitzchak Amar, I'll give you more than that. Over here it says, Bayoim. What's over here, Bayoim? Bashmini Atzeres, right? Bayoim Hashmini, Bayoim Hashmini Atzeres. B'yoim hashmini atzeres tiya lochem. B'yoim. And over there, where is over there? It says, u b'yoim. No, it's when you open up a Chumash Pinchas and you read about the karbanos. So the Torah says how many oxen, how many rams, how many sheep are brought on the first day. B'yoim harishan. Then when the Torah speaks about what is brought on the second day, it doesn't say b'yoim hasheni. It says u b'yoim hasheni. Of course, and on the second day, and on the third day. And is connecting the second to the first. Vav, that connects. It doesn't say, U bayoim hashmini. It only says, bayoim hashmini. The fact that there isn't a Vav shows you that we are not linking the 8th to the days prior. Another reason why you can't compare Shviur Shal Pesach to Shmini Atzeres. Shmini Atzeres, yes, say Shakianu. Shmini Atzeres, say Shakianu. Shviur Shal Pesach, do not say Shakianu. Rav Ashi Amar, another similar proof, all from this source, from the scripture, over here, meaning on the 8th day, Shmini Atzeres, it says, Kam Mishpat, that the karbanos should be brought. Kam Mishpat means according to its law. It's in the singular. Hassan, regarding all of the 7 days of Sukkot, the Torah says that the karbanos should be brought kim mishpatam, according to their, in the plural, law. In other words, we find in the Chumash that the Torah puts together the 7, and by karbanos we separate the eighth, it's considered a regel b'fnei atzmai. Okay, now the Gemara says, I will bring a raya. We tried to refute Rabbi Yechanan by, what about Shviya Shal Pesach? Now we're going to try to bring from a Tana a proof that Rabbi Yechanan is right, that we say Shakianu on Shmini Atzeres. Says the Braisa, Ha-Parim, the bulls, Ha-Elam are the rams, and Ha-Kevasim and the sheep are, says the Tanakama, Ma'akvin Zeh et Zeh. So aside of the number of bulls that we just mentioned, a total of 70, but in the Seder of 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, on every day of the 7 days of Sukkot, every day we also brought, in addition to the bulls, 2 rams and 14 sheep. Says the Tanakama, that if in one day in the Beis HaMikdash you didn't have all of these animals, you don't say, bring what you have. They are all essential one for the other. All of them connect. No, it's if they had the 13 bulls and they had 14 sheep, they only had 1 ram. They brought nothing. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, that by the Parim, the bulls are not ma'akvim zeh. So if instead of having 13 bulls, you had 12 bulls on the first day, you can bring it. It's the rams, every day they brought 2 rams. The sheep, every day of the 7 days, they brought 14 sheep. Consistent. The fact that the Torah allows for us to bring a different number, we diminished it. Mismatim v'holchem. But we're not focusing on more or less, what direction. The fact that there was a different number every day is arayah that the not ma'akev. Shere mismatim v'holchem. That is what Rabbi Yehuda says. And Amru Loi, to which the Chachamim, the Tanakama, the sages tell Rabbi Yehuda, if you're using that logic, why do you, Rabbi Yehuda, agree that if the rams, the 2 rams are essential, you have to have 2, that the 14 sheep have to be there? Why? Why don't we argue the same logic? On Shmini Atzeres, aside of us bringing only 1 bull, on Shmini Atzeres we bring only 1 ram. On Shmini Atzeres you only bring 7 sheep, half the amount. So why don't we say the fact that on Shmini Atzeres you bring a different number, that should also be an indication that it's not essential one to the other? So Amar Lohem, to which Rabbi Yehuda says, how can you bring a proof from the different type of numbers on Shmini Atzeres? It's a different Yom Tiv. Listen to his words. Shmini regel b'fnei atzmayu. Now guys, just because Rabbi Yehuda says these words in them by itself, it's not enough for you to say, aha, make a Shakianu. Because we want to make sure that we view Shmini Atzeres, a Yom Tov for itself, concerning the Shakianu. But now let's see what Rabbi Yehuda says. And what does he say? How does Rabbi Yehuda prove that it's considered a separate holiday? Shekeshem sheshivas yemei hachag. Just like during the 7 days of Yom Tov. Tu'unim, karbin, they require their own karbin. They require their own karbin. Shmini Atzeres, there's a system, there's a pattern. Shmini Atzeres has its own pattern, like we mentioned above. Every day of the 7 days has its own shiur. Rashi writes, shiur is referring to the music that the Levium would sing during the offering of the Karbanos, but we're not focusing here on the melody, we are focusing on the lyrics. Now Rashi writes that all of the words that were sung during the 7 days of Sukkot all had the content of the mitzvah of giving the gifts to the poor. It was about the mitzvahs of matnas aniyim. Rashi writes that he doesn't know the content or the kapitel of Tehillim that was sung on Shmini Atzeres, but it was not the same. Number 3, bracha. Now bracha is the key word. We don't know yet what bracha means. In other words, Rabbi Yehuda is pointing out how Shmini Atzeres is separated from the 7 days prior. There's a set of karbanos that are brought on the 7 days. There is a unique set that's brought on the 8th day. There is a content of the music that's done during the 7 days connected to Sukkot. There's a bracha that's made on the first 7 days. There is another bracha. We'll see what that is. Lina is, we mentioned this in the introduction. So, Bechlal, the Midrash says, it's good to know this, that every time a Yid brought a carbon to the Beis HaMikdash, even though it was brought already, there was a mitzvah, there was a positive commandment for you to remain in Yerushalayim overnight. It's called lina, sleep over. Put that aside. There was another din that when we came to the Beis HaMikdash for Yom Tiv, stay overnight. Don't leave Matzah Yom Tiv. Right? You can travel on Chol HaMoed. When we got there for the first day, for Pesach, don't leave Matzah Pesach. Wait until the next morning. So what he's saying is that just like you have this din of Lina for the 7 days, which means that on the 7th day, let's go to Pesach, just for example. In Eretz Yisrael, the 7th day is the last day of Pesach. Even if you would not bring a korban on the 7th day, you have to wait overnight because it's Yom Tiv. Go the next morning. Similarly, says Rebbe Yehuda, Shmini also has all of these rules. It has its own pattern of karbanos, like we mentioned. Only 1 bull, 1 ram, 7 sheep. It doesn't follow, it's separated. It has its own content in the shiur. It's not that the 7 days prior, every day they would sing the same kapitel. They would not, but it would have the same content. There would be an underlying common theme, and there was a different theme for Shmini Atzeres. Bracha is what we're going to focus on. We're going to get back to that in a moment. Lina means that there is an obligation to remain in Yerushalayim overnight and not go matzeh at night, Shmini Atzeres, but to go the next morning. Now, the Rishonim point out, hold on, Shmini Atzeres, you have to have simcha. To have simcha, you have to bring a korban. That's the way it was done. Anyways, whenever you bring a korban, you have to remain overnight. But that's not good enough. Now, Rabbi Yehuda is saying something a chiddush, because it's possible for a person to bring a shlamim on the 7th day of Sukkot. A korban shlamim can be eaten for 2 days. You will have on the 8th day korban shlamim meat, with which you will fulfill your obligation of simcha. But you didn't bring a korban that day. If not for the rule of Lina, you would be allowed to leave Matzah Yom Tov at night. What Rabbi Yehuda is saying is that Shmini Atzeres is considered a holiday in itself for us to apply the rule. You came for a Yom Tov, stay overnight. Only go the next morning. Daf Mem Zayin Amud Beis. End of the Braisa. Now, the Braisa spoke about they have their own bracha. What does that mean? Does that not mean, Zman, that you make Shakianu in the beginning of Sukkot? And then you make Shakianu on Shmini Atzeres. That is the meaning of bracha. So the Gemara says that's not necessarily what he means. It could mean, what he means is Birchas Hamazon v'Tefilla, like we mentioned in the beginning of today's shiur, that in davening and in Birchas Hamazon, right, we can add and by Kiddush, when we speak about the Yom Tiv, Sukkah is called Chag HaSukkah is Hazeh. And Shmini Atzeres, again, Girsas Rashi here is Shmini Chag Atzeres Hazeh. Our girsa is Shmini Atzeres HaChag Hazeh. There is a difference where you put the word Chag. Just to know that Al Pi Nigla over here. If you say Shmini Chag Atzeres Hazeh, Chag before Atzeres actually indicates that this is a new Yom Tiv. Atzeres literally means a gathering. Atzeres means don't do work, stop. The word Atzeres is not only connected to Shmini Atzeres, right? The Torah calls Shvuos Atzeres. Theoretically, every day in which you're not allowed to work is called the day of Atzeres. Stop working and gather together. But if the word Chag comes before Atzeres, it indicates it's Taka the 8th, but it's a new Chag. It's a Chag of Atzeres. Shmini Atzeres, putting the word Chag, connects more Shmini to prior. But independent of that, you see, that's the irony of the whole daf today. You see, it's called Shmini. Don't forget that. Shmini doesn't mean day number 1, it means day number 8. There is a very deep connection between the 8th and what comes prior. If not, you would begin a new count and not continue the old count. The chiddush is that even though from one side it's called the 8th, on the other side it's called the regel b'fnei atzmai. And be that as it may, if the meaning of this braisa of bracha is not zman, then you can't prove it from this braisa, because we would tolerate, on one hand, us saying Shmini Atzeres is regel b'fnei atzmai, and still don't make a Shakianu, because at the end of the day, it's a regel. It's called the 8th. So there's no proof. And indeed, hachinam mistabra, that the word bracha in this brisa is not referring to Shakianu, because the salka daitach zman. Don't forget, the brisa says that just like the 7 days require bracha, Shmini also requires bracha. What, all 7 days require a Shakianu? If the meaning of bracha is Chag HaSukkos, yeah, during every day of the 7 days in the Birchas Hamazon and in the Tefilla we say Chag HaSukkos. But if it means Shakianu kol shiva mi'ika, is a raya that it doesn't mean Shakianu? The Gemara counters that. No, that's not correct. Haloi kasha, because there is an important rule, Benegei Lamaisa. What happens if a person forgets to make a Shakianu the first night? A person took a lulav, you forgot to make Shakianu the first time, you took it the first time, you don't lose the Shakianu. When you chap, I never made the Shakianu, then make the Shakianu. In other words, during the first 7 days, it's shaykh, it's possible for you to make a Shakianu, because the Iloi barach, idna bevarach, idna bevarach lamachar. On the second day, and if you forget on the second day, liyoy machlina. So maybe it does mean Shakianu. And that would be a proof to Rabbi Yochanan. Again, the Gemara says, no, it can't mean Shakianu. I'll tell you why it can't mean. Because Shakianu has to be said over a cup of wine. And who has a cup of wine on Chol HaMoed? You only have a cup of wine when you're obligated to make Kiddush. And on Chol HaMoed, not everyone has wine. Now, what would you counter against that? Do you need to make a Shakianu holding a cup of wine? So, now if you're going to subscribe to Rav Nachman again, then you can teach that the brisa zman is Shakianu, and actually this brisa will be a proof that you can say it in the market. Because the amrad be'inan kois kol yama mi'ika. So the Gemara says, oichet nisht. I can tell you that the Zman means Shakianu, which would make this brisa a proof to Rabbi Yochanan, and I will argue that Shakianu can only be made over a cup, and the brisa still can say that during the 7 days of Sukah there's a possibility to make a Shakianu. You can make its own Shakianu if you have a cup. Dilma de ikla kois, then you'll make a Shakianu. So listen, guys, either the brisa is a proof to Rabbi Yochanan, or it's not a proof, but as we'll see in a moment, we do indeed paskin like Rabbi Yochanan. Now, before we come back to this question, and we're going to quote other Amoraim that argued with Rabbi Yochanan, we did mention this brisa. The brisa mentioned Shitas Rabbi Yehuda that spoke about various halachis in which Shmini Atzeres is considered its own Yom Tif, including the din of lina, of tarrying overnight. Even if you don't bring a carbon on Shmini Atzeres because you did not have to, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you cannot go back home Matzah Yom Tov at night. V'sava Rabbi Yehuda Shmini ta'un lina. But how can you say that this is the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda? L'chayra v'hatanya, we learned in a brayso that Rabbi Yehuda Oimer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Minayin lePesach sheni she'ein ta'un lina. It's even though when you introduce this whole rule of lina, of tarrying overnight, we connect it to Yom Tiv. You came to the Beis HaMikdash for Yom Tiv, tarry overnight. Hold on. Says that Rabbi Yehuda, what happens if a Jew was unable to bring Pesach Rishon and they're bringing the second Pesach? Do they have to tarry overnight? Because of the fact that it's Yom Tiv. So how do you know that by Pesach Sheni, you don't need lina, you are allowed to return immediately? Now, where is the source of lina? So we're quoting over here, there's a pasuk in Parshas Re'eh that's speaking about the first Pesach. And the pasuk says, Ufanisa ba'boiker v'halachta li'oyalecha. No, it's turn back in the morning. Turn back in the morning and go back home. I want to make something else clear. Turning back in the morning cannot mean the morning of the first day of Pesach. It's Yom Tov. We're not allowed to travel on Yom Tov. What it means, lina, for the first day of Yom Tov means, is that you brought the Korban Pesach on the 14th going into the 15th. Since the first day is Yom Tov, the day is Yom Tov, you can't matzah Yom Tov going into Chol HaMoed, go back home. You have to wait until the morning of the 16th, the morning of the 16th, and then go back home. That's the source of lina. Says this brayso that since the next pasuk in the A writes Sheishes Yomim Toichal Matzois, and we learned Chazal learned from over here that matzah only has to be eaten on the first night. There's no obligation to eat it on anything other than the first night, because here we excluded the seventh day, and that's the eighth midah of the Yud Gimel Midos, that once we exclude the seventh, it really excludes all the six. And we have this chazal that says, Es sheto'un shisha, that which has in it 6 days of Yom Tov. Really it means 7, but we're just quoting the words of the pasuk. A Yom Tov that has 7 days, that's a Yom Tov that demands lina. Es she'einoton shisha, Yom Tov that doesn't have 6 days, doesn't demand lina. L'chayda, Rabbi Yehuda is not only excluding Pesach Sheni, but l'chayda, let's argue we should exclude Shmini Atzeres, because Shmini Atzeres is only 1 day. There aren't 7 days following it, or 6 days following it. Oh, it's just like Rabbi Yehuda clearly says that Pesach Sheni doesn't demand lina, because it's not a 7-day holiday. L'chayda, does he also not exclude Shmini Atzeres, and that will be a contradiction, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yehuda? So the Gemara says no. He means only to exclude Pesach Sheni. In other words, the topic of lina in the Chumash is Pesach. And if the Torah is excluding something similar to Pesach. What's similar to Pesach Rishon? Pesach Sheni. But Shvuos, for example, that is only a 1-day Yom Tov, does have with it this mitzvah of lina, even though Shavuos is only for 1 night. And therefore, similarly, Rabbi Yehuda clearly holds that Shmini Atzeres, even though it's a 1-day holiday, is so chashuv that you have the mitzvah of tarrying overnight. And Hachi Nami Mistabram Ditnan, we have a Mishnah in Bikurim. It says, HaBikurim to unim karben. Amazing. When you brought Bikurim, when you brought from the 7 special fruits that Eretz Yisrael was particularly blessed with, when you brought its first fruits, and that mitzvah began with the holiday of Shavuos, but it could have gone way later, you would also bring a karban shlamim and vishir, and there would be a special, again, the lyrics, the words that the Levium would sing while the shlamim was brought with the Bikurim were from the kapitel Arei Mimcha, Hashem Kidelisani. That is what was said uniquely when you brought the Bikurim. And the tenufa, you have to wave it. And the lina, bringing of the Bikurim in itself demands lina, even if you didn't bring the shlamim. You brought Bikurim, you have to have lina. And now the Gemara says, beautiful. Man shamat leida amar tenufa. Who is the one? Now the Brisa doesn't say divrei Rabbi Yehuda, but who is the Tana that holds you have to wave the Bikurim? Only Rabbi Yehuda, as we'll see in a moment. And the Havamina now is no other Tana says it. Yet this Brisa says you also have to tarry overnight. Hold on. Bikurim is not a 7-day holiday. It's not even a 1-day holiday. If the Pshat in the Brisa we quoted above from Rabbi Yehuda is that he's excluding from this juxtaposition any moment that doesn't have Shisha, then there's a problem. Then why would you have to have lina by Bikurim? No, but you do have to have lina by Bikurim, and I know this Brisa is Rabbi Yehuda because you have to do the waving. So that proves that the only exclusion in the Brisa above is only a Yom Tov similar to Pesach Rishon that doesn't have 6 days Yom Tov following it, which is Pesach Sheni. Only that Yom Tov doesn't demand lina, but all else will, including Shmini Atzeres. Now, how do I know that Rabbi Yehuda is the author of this Brisa? Because Rabbi Yehuda is the one that holds that you have to wave Bikurim. Where do you know that from? The Tanya. Rabbi Yehuda Oimer. Now, the mitzvah of Bikurim is primarily in Parshas Ki Savoy. That's Devarim. Perek Chavav. And there's a beautiful Parsha. We're beginning quoting a word that we have in Pasuk Yud. We're at a certain point, the Torah says, Vihi Nachtoi, literally meaning place it. Taiches, the Rabbi Yehuda, Vihi Nachtoi in Pasuk Yud doesn't mean to put it down. It means to wave it. So says the Brisa on itself, Ato Omer, Tnufa, waving, Ato Omer is a Tnufa. You're telling me that Vihi Nachtoi doesn't mean the Pshat? Maybe Vihi Nachtoi means put it down. Can't mean put it down. Because in Pasuk Dalid, the Torah already says to put it down. Kishu Omer, Vihi Nichoi, Now, the Torah already tells you that at a certain point, the Bailam, the owner, the person that's bringing these first fruits, puts it down on the ground, on the floor of the temple courtyard. How do we interpret a word for it not to be a repetition of vihi nachtoi? At must mean that you wave it. Again, and the presumption is, since this is l'chora, the only time we find a Tana that subscribes to waving Bikurim, so that proves that the Braisa above is Rabbi Yehuda, as we explained. All of that is Araya, that Rabbi Yehuda has no problem with connecting the mitzvah of Lina to Shmini Atzeres, as he connects it also to Bikurim. And it also doesn't have a Yom Tov of 7 days. The Gemara says on that point, don't think that Rabbi Yehuda is the only one that holds that Bikurim has to be waived, because maybe the Tana was authored by Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, who also holds that the Bikurim has to be waived. The Tanya, it says that we're going to still focus in Parshas Kisavi. The Varim Perek Chavav Pasik Dalid. It says that the coin should take the basket from your hand, from you, the owner, from the one who's giving the Bikurim. Limeid says the Braisa, we learn from this verse that the Bikurim has to be waived. How do we know that? We'll see in a moment. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. And how did he get that? How do you see the kohen should take the basket from his hand? Where do you see waving? Because Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov has the Gezerah Shava. My Talmud Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Aso Yad Yad Mishlamim. Over here it says, as we just quoted the words, V'lokach hakohen atena mi yodecha. It says over there, and we're quoting a pasuk in Parshas Tzav. They were speaking about the offering of a carbon shlamim. It says Yadav Tiviyano, that with his own hands he should bring it. In other words, there was something that the owner, not Kohen, whoever brought a shlamim, did with his own hands. And then there was a fire. That's a pasuk concerning a carbon. Es Ishei Hashem. Oh, so why do we learn from the Gezerah Shava that what? Just like waving, right? The waving must be done makan kohen. Aflahal, 1 second. That waving must be done to shlamim. Who does the waving? The owner. Same thing. Mi yodecha, you do waving. Now the Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov continues. It's not only that the owner does the waving. There is another thing that we learn from this Gezerah Shava. So that the owner does waving, we learn from shlamim, because it says the words that Yadav Tiviyana, that he should, with his own hands, bring it, meaning do waving. By Bikurim, the Kohen does the waving. Makan, Kohen, Aflahalon, Kohen. Malahalon Bolim, Afkan Bolim. In other words, the remez of waving by the Baalim is learned from Shlamim. The source of the Kohen doing waving is learned, according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, from the Yodecha is already alluding to the waving. Now, V'lakach HaKohen, the Kohen does the waving. In both cases, by the Bikurim and by the Shlamim, they both wave it together. HaKetzad, how do they wave it together? Kohen maniach yad etachas yad ba'olam, the Kohen puts his hands under the hands of the owners, and they wave it together. Umeinif, big machlekes, what does that mean? According to Rashi and many other Rishonim, the owner puts his hands on the outside of the upper rim, and the Kohen puts his hand under the base. What we're trying to address is that if the pshat would be that the Kohen puts his hands over the hands of the owner, being that the Kohen has to hold the utensil in which you have these parts of the carbon, or the basket that has in it the fruits, there's a chatzitza, there's an interposition, not allowing the Kohen's hand to touch the keli. And that's one solution, that they did not put their hands physically one under the other, but the owner put his hands on the outer rim, the top of the outer rim, outside the outer rim, the Kohen put his hands underneath. All coming back is, so far, we did not prove that there is a Tana that says that you make Shakianu on Shmini Atzeres. But Rabbi Yechanan says so. So, my hava Allah, okay, what's the din? Says the Gemara, weiter, this was debated later. Rav Nachman Amar, oimnim zman b'shmini shel chag, like Rabbi Yechanan. Rav Sheisha says, ein oimnim zman b'shmini shel chag. And at the end, ve'ilchesem, second to last line in the Amid, that yes, oimnim zman b'shmini shel chag, we make a Shakianu. And now, Tanya Kavasi de Rav Nachman. It's amazing. When Rabbi Yochanan said that, they didn't find a Braisa yet. Now the Gemara is saying, when they learned Rav Nachman that was in Bavel, they found a Braisa to substantiate the Shita, which also is going to substantiate the Shita of Rabbi Yochanan. Says the Braisa, Shmini, meaning Shmini Atzeres, Daf Memches, Regel Bifnei Atzmai Le'ingen Pizar Keshav. However, we had Pizar Shekav in Yuma. We're going to have it soon again in Rosh Hashanah. Let's go through Rashi on every single one. This is an Amanic. We're going to read the Gemara. Keep your fingers on Rashi. The pay from Pizar is Payos Bifnei Atzmai. Payos means a lottery. What's the lottery? Look inside the Rashi, top line. Payas bifnei atzmai. Now guys, we're going to speak about this more, God willing, soon in the next final Perek of Sukah. The point of Payas is that since so many karbanos were brought, like we just mentioned today, a total of 70 parim, and every day 2 rams, and every day 14 sheep during Sukkos. So since on Yom Tov, all of the groups of the Kehanim came to do the Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash, a lottery was not even needed, but they created a rotation system, allowing members from every mishmar to partake of some of the karbanos over Sukkos, because there were that many. You didn't have to exclude, and you would only do that by making a lottery, but you made a rotation system. On Shmini Atzeres, again, since we don't consider Shmini Atzeres to be a continuum, but we consider all of the sacrifices brought on Shmini Atzeres to be, so to say, a standalone Yantiv, so for Shmini Atzeres we made a lottery, because not every mishmar was able to bring the karbanos of Shmini Atzeres, and you can't say, well, you brought it yesterday. No, today's a new Yantiv. So there was a lottery made for the 8th day, and that type of lottery was not made in the prior 7 days. Next is Zman, clear Zman from Pizar Shakianu. In other words, you make a Shakianu, a Braisa, on Shmini Atzeres. Zman b'fnei atzmai. The Reish from Pizar is Regel b'fnei atzmai. Regel b'fnei atzmai, Rashi says, how do we see it is its own Yom Tov? By the fact that we do not sit in the Sukah in the Holy Land. Again, we began today's sugya by actually paskening like Rabbi Yochanan, first version of Rabbi Yochanan, that outside Chutz La'aretz, outside Eretz Yisrael, in Chutz La'aretz, we do sit on the 8th day because it might be the 7th. But on the 8th day, you don't sit in the sukkah. The kuf from Kishav, it stands for Karben Bifnei Atzmai. It means it does not follow the pattern. It's connected to the lottery, but we're focusing on the pattern itself. Shira, the shin is Shira Bifnei Atzmai. Again, we had the Rashi and Amud Aleph, that during the 7 days, every day they use different lyrics, but all of the Tehillim that were sung during the Avodah of the Karbanos by the Leviim had in it the same theme, Matnas Aniyim, the mitzvah of leaving money for the poor. The theme of the shiur of Shmini Atzeres was different. And the Beis, which is the final, Kishav, Bracha Bifnei Atzmai. What is bracha b'fnei atzmai? Like we kept on mentioning today, that bracha doesn't mean zman. Bracha means that during Birchas Hamazon, during Tefilla, we can add during Kiddush. How do we call? We say the nusach chag hasukos, and on Shmini Atzeres we say Shmini Atzeres hachag hazeh. But let's conclude today by learning inside the Rashi, bracha le'atzmai, firstly, like we just said, es yoyim hashmini, but he's adding another understanding, that what does bracha b'fnei atzmai mean? Ubetoisefta mashma shemevarchem es hamelech. There was a special bracha we gave to the king on Shmini Atzeres. And that's beautiful because, we learn so much in Chassidus, the Midrash, regarding the whole meaning, the inner meaning of Shmini Atzeres, of kasha olai pridaschem. And the way the Rebbe explains, where you have people celebrating together and there's love amongst them and they're already feeling fearful of the separation, and let's another day spent together, I don't want to be separated. What will the other day help? So you'll anyways have to be separated. So the vart is that the unity that we can achieve on Shmini Atzeres is so powerful that we therefore never leave. I think that's what the meaning of blessing the king. God is the king. Blessing in Chassidus is bringing down the king. That dafka on Shmini Atzeres, we were able to bring the king down so much that we became so united that there's no more a predaschen, because even when we go back into the year, we bring the king with us. God willing, Chevra, to be continued.